Well, welcome everyone today. We have, this is our vertical, and we will be giving you a wealth of information. And by we, I mean Miss Anita and Miss Stephanie, who I will let introduce themselves in just a moment. If you are here for our management consulting vertical, you are in the right place. Like I said, a wealth of information today. So I am going to go ahead and go on mute so that our two fabulous and fearless leaders for this vertical can introduce themselves. Ms. Stephanie, would you like to take us off first?
Sure. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. I'm excited about the conversation today. We have kind of a fun conversation planned on industry jargon and buzzwords. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Anita will kick us off. I'm Stephanie Kusibab. I am the CEO and Chief Strategist at Ascentium. Ascentium is a strategy consultancy based in the Chicago area, and we help organizational leaders align their teams and figure out what's new and what's next for their business. Anita?
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you're on the, well, no, it's all good afternoon. Happy to be here with you today. As Stephanie mentioned, we think that we've got a very relevant and lively topic that we can all relate to. So we're looking forward to your participation. I am Anita Nygaard. I have an HR consulting firm based in Southern California, but we do have clients across the country. We continually try to help our employers translate and make sense of and navigate through the ever-changing employment landscape, whether it's federal laws, state laws, what have you, and to help keep their employees engaged in the process. So without any further ado, I'll let Stephanie run through some housekeeping issues, and we look forward to getting started.
Maybe I'll turn that over to Ashley. Any announcements before we get started here?
Only announcements will be the contact list that I'm going to drop into our chat.
Great. Any upcoming meetings we should know about?
We do have some really exciting, this Friday will be our community forum, which we have had some really great numbers attending over the last couple of weeks. And then we've got a couple of upcoming verticals as well that I'll go ahead and drop in there.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. And Anita, I'm just going to pass it right back over to you to introduce our topic for today. And then I can jump in and help facilitate the conversation.
Sounds good. All right. Well, let's get things started. All right, folks. So as Stephanie mentioned, we wanted to focus on workplace jargon, industry jargon. So we know that that's the staple of the modern organization right now. Yet few things are more universally annoying. Let's face it. People love to complain about jargon. People will say it's unnecessary, it's empty, it's pretentious, it can be hard to understand. Organizational researchers will use it to member employee perceptions of, pardon the French, bullshit at their offices, right? Come on, we can all relate. Industry and government leaders will criticize it or have even tried to regulate against its use. Despite complaints, however, jargon continues to thrive in most professions. Well, why is that? Well, the truth is, let's go back to define what is jargon. Well, it's terms, expressions, it can even be acronyms that are specific to a particular industry or a profession. Whether you're a consultant, a nurse, a truck driver, a librarian, a government official, you have heard and used a fair amount of jargon, right? So it can be very useful. It can be used in place of regular speech to abbreviate a conversation and get to the point more quickly. But the key bottom line appears to be, well, who's your audience? How are you using it? How do you intend it to be received? So let's not confuse jargon with slang. Slang is completely different. Slang is informal and usually used in social settings. Jargon is more professional terminology. Jargon can serve a number of good fundamental needs. It can substitute as accurate or efficient communication. Think of air traffic controllers that say Alpha Bravo 12 instead of AB 12, just to be clear about a number of a plane or something like that. It can facilitate social bonding of a shared identity between a speaker and an audience, or used as a linguistic tool to signify membership in a professional community. I'll give you a very simple example of that. We're all Highrise members. We understand that this is a topical vertical. People outside of Highrise aren't going to, oh, I attended a vertical today on Highrise. People outside of Highrise are going to say, you did what? You attended a what? A vertical? Were you standing? What do you mean a vertical? So there are some very helpful ways to use jargon. Jargon can also be used, let's face it, to show off, to pretend that you've got a higher status with people who aren't as informed, or it can be used to alienate. So we're going to get to the bottom of what jargon exists that you are familiar with and use regularly, and how do you use it? Do you use it to inform and connect, or do you use it to alienate? Maybe even for good reasons, to vet out people who are posers. So I'll share with you just very quickly. There was a recent HBR study looking at how people use jargon, and what they found out is that people who feel that they have a less robust status will tend to use jargon more than people who have a more robust or senior status within their profession. So that's a little caveat. But I'm going to, Stephanie and I had a fun idea of how we can start to all participate, throw out some jargon that we use regularly, and then start to take a look at this stuff and see, is it helpful? Is it helpful? Is it educational? Is it informative?
Yep. So Ashley just made me a co-host, so let me share my screen with you for a moment. We're going to do a little exercise here. So you're probably at your computer. Hopefully most of you are at a computer, and just ask you to pop into your browser, whether that's Chrome or something else, and go to menti.com, menti.com, and then use this code, and it will pop you in to be able to give us 2 or 3 different pieces of jargon that you're using in your business or in your industry. Give us some examples, and we will see it all come together here as you type those in. We'll get a little word cloud going here. So menti.com, and then type in 442, there we go, 62705. And then you can enter your slang word or your jargon words. Oh, already I have no idea what most of these are. FLSA, ROI, SLA, PPP, CFRA, DEPO, depot. That sounds like a train to me. Attack surface, that sounds scary. Environmental attributes, vulnerabilities, compliance, net zero.
Glad to see you, Bitta. Good, Bitta made it.
Yes, all kinds of things. Scrum. I'm going to add a couple. I love it.
4426.
2705. Nice. Telematics. InfoSec. That's an interesting one. Look at all the abbreviations. That's the part. Like, unless you're in that, you would absolutely not have a clue about what any of those are. CRM. Yep. EBITDA. I love it. So which ones are, does anyone want to jump in and tell us what one of their acronyms or one of their pieces of jargon stand for? I want to know what an attack surface is. Alex?
Mine was, one of the ones that I put in was IRP, Incident Response Plan. I don't know that I see it here, but it's akin to attack surface. It's cybersecurity speak, which is becoming really popular in a bad way these days. So it's actually one that might be useful to familiarize yourself with.
Say it again, IRP, what does it stand for?
Incident Response Plan.
Okay. So if there's a cyber attack, what do you do in response?
Yeah.
And how many times a day do you say IRP?
Pretty frequently, because it's becoming a required governance document for most businesses to have. So if like a third party, a client or regulator is assessing your cybersecurity posture for purposes of a contract or anything else, that's one of the key 4 documents. And there's 3 other acronyms I could throw out, but I'll spare you all. So
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. So now we know what IRP stands for and why we need one. That's helpful. Dylan?
I put in attack surface, and it's a pretty novel way of contextualizing an issue. This is also, to Alex's point, within the cyber and tech world, where if there's a problem, if somebody made a mistake and it could be exploited for criminal use, the attack surface is how many things can poke it and break it, because the bigger that is, the more at risk you are.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and is this a term that you coined or that is being used in the marketplace pretty broadly?
It is, and I have not coined it. It is very popular in the deep tech circles, and it is gradually, some would say quickly, getting more popular in those woke board level discussions, those with someone on the board in a cyber capacity.
Yeah, it definitely sounds compelling.
Mhm.
Sounds like something I need to be paying attention to and be careful about, for sure. A little bit of a scare tactic, maybe.
Usually it's used to reduce the fear, because you can say, oh, a 7-year-old could knock this thing over. But if it's behind a big wall, which is kind of the attack surface meaning, then maybe 7-year-olds don't have access to it and so can't knock it over. So it's usually used to
Quell
reduce
fear.
fear. Yeah, right.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. But it's interesting how you said that it's something that sort of started really deep in sort of the technology, right? The people who are closest to it. And then now it's starting to be used more broadly. And so I think that there's a really, Ken, maybe you have some thoughts on this given the work that you do, but there's sort of an interesting etymology about how some of this language starts really sort of tightly held close to the vest. And then the more often it's used and the more context it's used in, the broader it becomes, or the more well-known it becomes, and until it becomes part of our lexicon. And not to put you on the spot, but any thoughts on that?
I think you're spot on. The way you explained it is exactly right. And I just think it's interesting to hear them the first time, because I always make a decision in the moment. Am I going to ask what this means, or should I just stay quiet and see if the meaning comes out in the context? And it usually does. Although I added telematics, I'm starting a project now. I have no idea what it is, but I'm hoping that once I start getting material from the client, I'll find out.
I bet we could ask, does anyone on this call want to explain what telematics is?
Sure, this is Seth.
All right, Seth.
Yeah, telematics is such like GPS positioning, all the properties of your location for tracking purposes. There's a lot of different nuances that can come from it, but that's an example, like your GPS positioning and where you are.
Awesome. There you go, Ken.
I'll write you into the scope of work, Seth.
Very good, thank you.
Took something away from our
Message
call today. That's awesome. Does anyone else want to comment on these? InfoSec, what is InfoSec?
Information security, it's short for information security.
Okay.
Which is different from cybersecurity, only in that if you say information security, it would include printed materials. So printed papers and other things, which we still have some of and need to be protected. So cyber just connotes anything in digital form. But security, data security nonetheless, is basically the premise. So
why would you say InfoSec instead of information security? Like what would prompt you to choose that version of the term?
Well, it's shorter for one, and I think it's catchy, InfoSec. That's a big buzzword. And I think like you said, Stephanie, it does give people a sense of insidership, like InfoSec practitioner, is a thing, right? It's an industry term now. So I think it's both convenience and it has a meaning in that, okay, you're part of a inner sanctum of people within technology who do cybersecurity.
Right. Who know what that is. You can't be part of the club unless you know what the terms are, which is great if you're looking for that, if that's your purpose, right? But it's interesting how these terms, sometimes they can be exclusionary as well, right? They can be inclusionary to mean that you're part of the inner circle, but also from a client perspective, as consultants, we always have to be thinking about from a client perspective, when we use a term, is it helping us to look smarter? Or is it helping us to look more aloof? Is it precluding our clients from actually understanding what we're talking about? Or is it simply inciting them to ask a question? Right, to Ken's point about, do I ask or don't I ask? Are we asking our clients to work hard in order to hear us and understand us when we use these terms? Or do they make us, seem more like experts?
I think it's less problematic when you have a situation where, like, waiting to find out. It's just a game I play with myself because I figure I'm going to get a bunch of information and I can deduce it. So that's sort of a fun thing. But a lot of times if I'm writing a keynote or a series of messaging for a conference or something, the company who's presenting will just throw these terms out, and I always have to go through checking, does the audience know this? How do they think about it? And most of the time it's that habit of just repeating acronyms that oh gee, no, nobody knows that but us all, and we have to pull those things apart. So it's that, I think earlier it was said, you have to know the audience and what they know.
Yeah. Yeah. How many of you have sat in a meeting playing bullshit bingo? Yes? No? Are you familiar with that term? No, it's more for folks that have worked internally in large corporations. I've been in many a meeting where I've played bullshit bingo with the guy next to me, and you basically write a list of kind of the terms that get thrown around by management all the time, so much so that they've lost meaning, right? Maybe they had meaning at one point and then they lost meaning. And so you make a list of those terms, and then that you put a check mark next to the term every time it's used in the course of that meeting, that 1 hour or 2 hour or however long the meeting is. Really fun in a day-long meeting because you get rack up some really big tick marks, lots of numbers there. But it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek exercise for people within an organization, and it's really telling if you're on the management side to get a hold of one of those sheets and understand what has lost meaning, right? Where have we lost the masses because we've been using these sort of buzzwords so often that they've lost meaning. Anyone else experienced that? Any other comments on that?
You make me think of just reflecting that my goal is to connect and communicate. And I find that the most concise, fastest, shortest communications I've ever read are poetry. And I haven't seen a lot of acronyms in poetry, unless someone's making fun of them.
I love that. Poetry. Yeah. No acronyms in poetry. I love that. Carlos, what were you going to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, when I was in Fortune 500, I spent about a long time in Fortune 500, and it did become an issue where, every year it was, you always came up with these new KPIs, and then you had to kind of like, sometimes it came from home office and you had to kind of push it to your teams, and it always get put into some type of acronym. And I noticed after a couple of years that, your employees would just kind of roll their eyes, oh, here's the new one, and so if you use it too much for things like new initiatives and stuff like that, they lose a lot of the effect that you're trying to get. I think the initial attempt is to try to rally people around something that's simple, a 3-word or 4-word phrase, or maybe an acronym, and it sort of gets people kind of like operating very efficiently. But what happens is it loses a lot of the intention, and then it actually gets dismissed. And so you people actually don't even work that hard. A lot of times I've had to overcome that by sort of like saying, hey, yeah, this is from corporate, this is how we can implement it, and sort of not focus on that acronym, if you will, because it does influence the team in a negative way if done wrong.
Yeah, and sometimes that acronym actually it loses all context, right? So by shortening this, it's easier to talk about, it's easier to say, but you've lost the context, the explanatory context that comes along with it. Like KPI, you just threw that out, right? Without even thinking about it, key performance indicator. I've actually had to explain that 2 or 3 times to clients this year, smaller clients, right? Because it's not something that they'd heard before, because they didn't come from Fortune 500 or from one of the big companies. But if you say key performance indicator, everyone kind of gets what that is, right? At least you get a sense of it. You can imagine what it would be, because taking the words in context makes sense. But if you simply say KPI, it can be really hard to decipher that. Yeah.
Stephanie, I'm going to pick on Dane Stephenson for a moment, because we all know that the law is great about not adding more acronyms and strange terminology to our lexicon. So Dane, help us out, since you're an employment law attorney, and we've got acronyms like FMLA, which are very different than FLSA, and so on and so forth. How do you best help your clients navigate through these, new laws or new acronyms without letting them, without allowing them to kind of drown in the alphabet soup?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to drown any less because they know what the acronym stands for. So every law has an acronym, and every government agency has an acronym. It's just the way it works. And I'm listening and trying to imagine how it's watered down. I know what KPIs are, and it's easier for me to think about it as a KPI than if someone said key performance indicator. I'd have to think about it for a minute to convert it to KPI. So
That's a really interesting perspective.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Obviously, if people don't know, they don't know. But if you're talking to informed people, then the acronyms, how we speed through things. I can't imagine writing briefs where we write out at the beginning of every document, we always obviously put what the acronyms are and then put it in parentheses to define it, just in case. And I guess you do that in a speech as well, but that's a lot of extra words.
Yeah.
One of the interesting difficulties that I've seen arise, and both working overseas and working within organizations that have significant employees in multiple languages, is the extraordinary difficulty of translating acronyms, because they will show up as a different set of letters or in a different order in different languages. And so even when those people are English facile and you speak in a US English acronym, they won't recognize it from French or from German or from Swahili. So in terms of, being globally communicative, you have to be really thoughtful. And I just was just at a conference where an international organization decided to eliminate all acronyms except 1 or 2 that were very long-standing and widely known. It's kind of an interesting thought that I had never really grappled with before in as much detail.
So I would have thought that the acronyms would, well, maybe not if you have different characters, but because even if you translate to where you still have the same phonetic alphabet to German or even a Latin language or something. Like if you do Fair Labor Standards Act, they're going to move those words around potentially, and the Family Medical Leave Act, like it's the whole words aren't going to come out right either.
Right.
Yeah, they certainly wouldn't be in the same order, right? But there's a word for family, there's a word for medical, and there's a word for leave, right? And so FMLA, those words may not be the right letters, right? Those letters may not be the right letters for the words that it translates to. Yeah. Interesting. So how do you decide what's relevant? Like, how do you decide what you need to explain and when you need to use the full length words and when you use the acronyms? Because we all have this, right? We all had something to add to this collage of acronyms.
I think instinctively, you know, when something's common, a common term, but when you're, you know, if I'm talking to a trade member like EBITDA, then it'll be fine. But if I'm talking to one of my sellers about his valuation, I would spell it out for him the first time, and then I might refer to it, you know, as EBITDA after that. My thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw a challenge out there because I know in my field, I've had other HR professionals and HR consultants try to play this game with me where, you know, for example, so I'm in California and goodness knows we pass laws every 10, 15 minutes. Something new. There's a ruling, there's something new all throughout the day, almost every day. And they'll say, oh, are you familiar with AB 1235? They'll just refer to that. And I'll be like, oh, for God's sakes, are we really going to play this game? So let me just throw out a challenging question. When do you feel it would be appropriate to kind of call someone on the carpet or just or vet them out? Let's put it that way. It could be maybe an interview. It could be you're trying to connect with another industry contact that's trying to let you know how experienced they are. And you're thinking, well, let's just see how experienced you are. When have you used that to vet someone?
What this is relating to me to is in every single legal presentation, people often refer to cases. And so they'll say, as such and such held, and they don't tell you what that case held, but they wouldn't get through anything in their hour if they had to go back and explain each one of those. I mean, it's just the short, and half the audience may not know what it is and they need to go look it up. So I don't know if we're getting a solution here, but we use a lot of shorthands for a lot of reasons, and it might, I mean, in some, for me, you have both sides of it, because if we already know it all, somebody explaining all of it to me, I'm gonna like put a knife in my head and run out of the room or something.
Well, at least you're not getting dramatic about it or anything.
I mean, you can either bore people who know to death, or you know, so it's always got to be know your audience. And if you have a mixed audience, then you're going middle road. But to talk about like AB 1255 and explain exactly what it is as opposed to that acronym, I mean, thank God for Google.
But we don't always have Google in front of us, right? Go ahead, Dylan.
I guess to me, that's kind of the value proposition of consulting, is that I do not know a thing. And I don't know the words for it. I don't know anything about it except maybe what I watched on CNN last night. And I need someone who does know a thing. And usually knowing about a thing correlates really well with knowing the jargon about that thing. And so the value proposition of knowing a thing is being able to break it down and make that thing accessible to people who don't know about it. So as we say, like, know your audience. if you got to speak in words they understand, whether, you know, and that means choosing jargon that they that they understand. I speak differently to CFOs than I do to COOs, because like Lean Six Sigma resounds much better with COOs than it does with CFOs, and like IRR resounds a lot better with CFOs. And if I am talking to a CFO who doesn't know IRR, that's a good indication that the conversation is not going to be a productive one for me.
Yeah, if they don't understand what that internal rate of return even means, then it's hard to have a conversation about how you can help them with it, right?
And they're probably not a very like that CFO is not going to be a good match for the metrics that I would deliver them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where I find kind of what I just did, right? Where we're picking it up and saying the words as well as the acronym. I find sometimes helps to bridge that gap. I'm both training my clients on the right words or the right acronyms or what to listen for in the future. But then also, you know, if I say IRR and they know what that means, you can sort of see it in their eyes. And so then I rattle off you know, IRR, internal rate of return, what we're going to do is, right? And so it's sort of just part of the sentence, and meeting them halfway, meeting them where they are, regardless of whether they know the acronym or don't know the acronym. That's part of, as a facilitator, one of the things that I have to do a lot to make sure, because I've got different people in the room who may not all speak the same language. They may not all speak the same jargon. And so as a facilitator or as a leader of a meeting, which you often are, it's important to bring everyone along and have everyone come together in order to be able to get them to have a conversation to move forward as a single entity, right? As a single unit. And so that's where this sort of inline translation, maybe that's a way to sort of describe it, where we're using both the acronym and somebody can tune out once they hear it and they know what it means, or as well as the definition, so that if they didn't know what it means, at least they can sort of follow the conversation. This one possible solution if we're looking for solutions. Dane.
Building on that, you make me think of some clients where I've worked in an industry that I know little about the industry at the start, and they use acronyms. And there's been 3 or 4 examples where I've been the dumb person digging to understand what the acronym means and finding out that there's not agreement within the client company on what the acronym means. And sometimes spending close to 3 or 4 hours on what an acronym truly means to different people, what its implications are, how it's been used, is it's almost a service to them to better understand what they're talking about, which is one of the reasons they've had, often had trouble solving certain issues.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yes, I do an exercise sometimes with groups at the beginning of the day to encourage them to listen to one another and ask questions, where I ask them, everyone, to write down as many words as they can think of that have to do with a particular word. So let's do it. If you'll play along with me, it's a 90-second, it'll take us just a few minutes. Are you up for this? So grab a piece of paper or a note or somewhere, grab something that you can write on, okay? And what we're going to do is I'm going to put my timer on. This is so impromptu, so bear with me here. I'm going to put my timer on and we're going to take 90 seconds. So when I say go, you're going to write down as many words as you can think of in 90 seconds, whatever pops into your mind, don't edit, that have to do with this one word I'm going to tell you. There's just a couple of small rules. One is that iterations of the same word are different. So mom and mother are 2 different words, but cup and cups are the same word. Okay, makes sense? All right, here we go. 90 seconds. Every word that pops into your mind that has to do with consulting. right? We're all consultants. So what are all of your words that have to do with consulting? Or if you're not a consultant, you've hired one, so. Okay, stop. All right. So now count up the number of words you have on your page. All right. I think I'm seeing everyone pretty much looked up. So done counting, yes? Okay. All right. So now what you can either raise your physical hand or your virtual hand. Who has more than 10 words? More than 15 words? If you raised your virtual hand, put it down if you have fewer. More than 20 words? More than 25 words? 10. All right, 10, you're the man. So here's what we need to do, all right? Go slow. And you are going to say the words on your page one at a time, all right? And everyone, let's just use your real hands because it's just faster than the virtual hands at this moment, okay? So if you have on your page the same word that Ken says, raise your hand, okay? All right, Ken? One at a time, please. Off of mute. There we go.
I didn't put unmute it down as one of them. Okay. Talking, listening, solving, waiting, defining.
We're looking for any word that everyone has on their page. All right, keep going.
Okay. Defining, research, reading, exploring, context, audience, wonder, creative, chatting, tangents, patience, clues, action, inaction, detective, looking, diving, basics, culture, and vocabulary.
But we're all consultants, right? I mean, mostly, or we've used the consultant. 25 words related to consulting and not one that we all had in common. Crazy, right? What does that tell us? That even if we're using the same words or the same acronyms, they don't have the same meaning. Right?
I'm wondering if my list will resonate with other people. May I try?
You're welcome to try, Joanne, but we were looking for a word, so anything that everyone had on their page.
Yeah, but you said define the word consulting. But
I
that-
didn't say define the word consulting. I said what comes to mind when we use the word consulting, but you're welcome to try, Joanne. Go ahead.
Thank you. I hope some more hands will raise up. Okay, coaching. Anybody? Oh, great. Advising. Yes. Counseling. Yes. Teaching. Yes. Strategizing. Analyzing. Information processing. Distilling. Diagnosing. Problem solving. Problem solving, yes. Forecasting.
So interesting, right? A few more hands, but still not even half, right? Not any of those words. There wasn't half of us didn't raise our hands for any of those words. So we're not even talking about everyone. We're talking about half the people think of it differently, or when that word comes to mind, they have a different thing that comes into their mind that comes into your mind, right? That's not just you, Joanne, but everyone. And so it's a really good reminder about the importance of context and explanation and asking questions and further clarifying, right? Because even though you think it means the same thing, it doesn't always.
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
So it's also how you think about things, because a lot of what Joanne and Ken said were more verbs related to what you do in consulting. A lot of my words were more aspects of consulting. So I wrote down things like clients, travel, advice, stress, things of that nature. Me, because I've been doing it for so long. Broad, it's a broad category, it can mean so many things. So I think it's all how you chose to think about it, but they're not necessarily different in terms of what you do, but how you think about things and how what came to your mind first, quite frankly. So
Exactly, right? So if we're in a conversation and I say the word consulting and I think that everyone is thinking the same thing I am, I'm wrong, right? Yeah. And so maybe that's it could be an indictment for jargon, or it could be a benefit for jargon in thinking, if you think that by using jargon, it's more precise, perhaps in some cases, but perhaps not, right? So just an interesting exercise. I do that exercise a lot of times with boards of directors or organizational leadership teams who seem to be having the problem that Willing was mentioning, which is they're saying the same things, but not speaking the same language, right? Not interpreting those words the same way.
I think it happens more with very general terms, something like, customer or product or, invoice that people naturally have. They think they know what that means in their context, but in any specific context, you really ought to take more effort to define those generic terms. The specific ones, probably people have a shared understanding of when it's a very specialized term.
Hopefully, right? Yes, hopefully. But interestingly, I've done this exercise with boards of directors at a conference where they are at like their association's conference or their industry conference. And so you would think that they would all be thinking about the same conference. And even then, completely different lists. It's fascinating. But Bob, I think you're right. I think if it's a more specific word, you're more likely to get a narrower definition, right? People are likely to have more narrow understandings.
So one of the clients that I just recalled where there was confusion on acronyms was one of the major three sites in the US that's dealing with nuclear fusion, and different teams needed to coordinate what they were doing. And when we started looking at some of the terms that were used that they kind of thought they all agreed on, it turns out there was not agreement, which made the coordination of the different teams' work coming together somewhat more difficult. And these, of course, these are every single person had at least one PhD, if not two or three, in science, engineering, or math, where we think of high precision as the watchword.
They should learn from lawyers, from I have a law degree, but I'm not a practicing attorney, but from working in law firms, they define the terms first, and then they draft the contract. So both sides will have a complete and clear understanding of what you mean by this term, what you mean by that term. Even very commonly used words. It's like definitions, and then is the comment. That will help with people communicate on the same term.
Well, as a lawyer, one thing I've learned in dealing with different companies is, well, definitions of certain jargon is similar in certain industries. It's not necessarily the same. And just because, lawyers, I always tell clients that when they're being questioned by lawyers are both ignorant and arrogant. They're ignorant of the jargon in a particular company because every company has their own jargon and may even use the same phrase in a completely different way from company to company, even though they're in the same industry. And they're arrogant because they think they know what they're talking about when they don't. And I've had more cases where people have gotten confused based on jargon and the fact that, up can mean down at company A, where down means up at company B.
Yes.
And as consultants, we have to learn the jargon the minute we walk in the door, right? You have to, in some ways, it's a way of assimilating to the culture is by learning the jargon, because then they trust you as an insider. They trust that you understand their world. And yet, to Willing's point, sometimes their world, even in their world, they don't all agree with the use or the definitions of the jargon.
But isn't that a very, that exercise is a very strategic way to just create awareness that we all think of words in a different way, so that because you're headed down in your work to find common ground. And so by accepting that, you have a nice human moment of acceptance where everybody goes, yeah, I do think differently. So let's take in everyone else's input and then we'll figure out how to move ahead. I mean, that was the purpose, right? So which I think is great. And I think in this case, it serves sort of the same purpose. It's finding that way, whether you're learning the jargon or not learning the jargon, we're coming in as outsiders who have an outside perspective. And that's the piece that's valuable. And so in order for that outsider with a third-party perspective to help, and Joanne's words, to solve and advise and coach on all those important things that need to get done, we are coming in with that badge of I'm not from this planet. And so we know we need to learn about the planet before we can do what we came to do. And so I just like that you're creating moments for human interaction, because that's where all the good information is going to come from.
And opening up people to hear what others are saying, right? Because if we hear a word and we automatically think we know what it means, then we stop listening. And we stop trying to assimilate and understand the nuance of the definition that each other has.
Yeah, from a brand messaging point of view, you don't want to lose your audience with all the acronyms nobody knows. Nobody wants to read the rest of the stuff anymore. They just tune out, they just goodbye, they move on to someone else. So make sure you distill and outline and simplify your message with, I call it a 660 rule. Use the 6-year-old language for the value of 60 years old. And that's not easy, it's harder when you make it simple, make it more cut to the chase with layman language. And at the same time, you don't lose your expertise either. But there are, if you have an acronym that is not commonly used, like IRR or KPI. I mean, KPI, they're just used, everybody knows what it means, okay? But if you have something not commonly used, then make sure you define it clearly. And that's, using my jargon is brand messaging.
Right, or just don't use it, right? Or just use the explanation and not that term that could be off-putting to some.
Joanne, you're talking poetry.
Yes.
Yeah, I do like poetry.
Which is why most of us don't write it, because it's exceedingly difficult to think that clearly and write that precisely.
Yes, you got it. And that is based on the complete understanding of your value proposition and your unique value proposition. That's the hard part.
Yeah. David, before we close, we haven't heard anything from David or John. I know the two of you have been here listening intently. Any thoughts, David, before we close the call here?
I think really communication is the most important thing, regardless of who you're working with. So it's kind of interesting seeing how it applies to consulting. And it's not just working with clients, but also like internally as well, especially with your colleagues and staff and whatnot. Like just defining the scope of what you're discussing about is huge. Like I've gone through conversations thinking I knew what somebody was talking about. They thought the same thing. We meet next week. We're on completely different levels. So just taking a little bit of extra time to make sure you really understand what you're both actually talking about is huge.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you. Yeah, we've all had that experience, right? You come back and you're like, wait, we had this conversation. What happened? Yeah. David Choi, any thoughts? And then I'm going to call on Todd. John Choi, sorry, John.
Yeah, personally, I agree with Joanne's saying, you know, you need to clarify the meaning of the jargon word in the beginning step. Otherwise, it talks about the like a foreign language, each other.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Todd, any thoughts as you've been listening closely here?
Yeah, I just echo what was said previously about just it really being communication and, you know, not, I guess, making assumptions about what people know or don't know. And you know, and then also being able to kind of, I guess, read your reactions or the reactions of the folks you're speaking to. And then, you know, if you, because we all have a tendency to use a terminology like this and acronyms, and it just happens sort of naturally because we're communicating amongst ourselves with people that we know and know this language. So we assume that it's common. So I think it's being able to read the reaction of somebody who's like, looks a little glazed over or like you've kind of lost the conversation for a second. I think it's just being able to recognize that and back up and make sure that people know what you're trying to get to.
Great point, right? Paying attention and not just knowing your audience, but also watching and listening and seeing what their reactions are as a clue to where you need to go next. Absolutely. Well, Anita, you kicked us off, so do you want to take us home here?
You know, what I keep coming back to is if it were easy, we would all be poets.
I love that.
We're consultants, we're professional, we're experienced, and hopefully our goal is to connect, inform, educate, and be a consultative expert. But this was a lively topic. We can't thank you enough for all your participation. It made it really fun, and I think we've all come away a little smarter on this topic and a little bit more aware. So that's really, really awesome. Thanks so much, Stephanie, for managing this very interactive session.
Thank you for bringing it forward, Anita, and thanks everyone for participating. We so much appreciate your active participation. That's what makes these calls fun and interesting and a learning experience for all of us. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anita and Stephanie. A huge thank you.
Thanks.
In fact, that was tremendous. I love when it's interactive. So again, thank you to panelists. Thanks for members for being here today for our management consulting vertical. If you've got any questions, I'm sure Anita and Stephanie would be happy to address those. But we wish you all well for the rest of today.